Welcome to Khanversations. I'm Muqtedar Khan, and today we are going to talk about Brazil, one of the most important countries in the world and clearly the leader in the global south. They have had their elections, and surprise, surprise, the former president Lula is back in power. When Lula was president, Brazil was one of the most important countries in the world. President Obama described Lula as one of the most incredible politicians in the world. Brazil was leader in the BRICS, and I remember very clearly that there used to be an organization called World Social Forum. Now all we hear about is World Economic Forum. We hardly hear anything about the World Social Forum. So I have with me two prominent scholars from Brazil, both of whom have been alumni of the State Department's U.S. Institute on American Foreign Policy, which is housed at the University of Delaware, and I'm happy to be its academic director. So Professor Dawisson Lopes and Professor Daniel Barrieros, welcome to Khanversations.
It's a pleasure to join you, Professor Khan.
Professor Lopes is Professor of International and Comparative Politics at the Federal University of Minas Gerais in Brazil. He's currently serving as visiting scholar at the University of Oxford's Latin American Center. And Professor Barrieros is an associate professor of economic and comparative history at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. And he's also the vice president of the International Big History Association. So I'm going to start with very easy and simple question. How do you react to the defeat of Bolsonaro and also the victory of Lula? We'll start with Professor Dawisson first.
It's a big relief. This is how I feel. Honestly, I feel we were really on the verge of becoming, and I won't sound much diplomatic here, a Hungary-like autocracy. What do I mean? Institutions were being eroded from inside, and we have this fear that should Bolsonaro win again, Brazilian institutions, democratic institutions would not resist. So it's a relief, in one word.
What about you, Danny?
Yes, it's a great relief to know that all the institutions hold against the attempt of control by far-right forces. It's a great relief. Our democracy is alive, and it's very good.
Lula had to leave because of some constitutional restrictions, right? Even when he left, apparently his approval ratings was about 80%. But there were also scandals associated with him, and there were accusations of corruption. How was he able to overcome those scandals in this election? Is it just that people were sick and fed up with Bolsonaro, or is it that he had an agenda which people love so much that they ignored some of those accusations?
It's a great question. All those accusations, all those allegations have been dropped, as a matter of fact, for legal inconsistencies. Still, he's been kept in prison for 17 months. He was behind bars until recently, until mid-2020, and he only would become eligible again in mid-2021. So, I mean, he's been an eligible candidate for only 16, 18 months now. But at the moment he became eligible again, he's been leading every poll in the country, and it's been a very consistent lead. So what do I make of it? People were really sick and tired of Bolsonaro, especially because of the pandemic, his handling or mishandling during the COVID-19 pandemic, which was aggravated by Brazil's poor performance in the economy. Brazilian economic indicators are really bad at this moment. And so the people took a decision to oust the incumbent president, Jair Bolsonaro. This is how I read the current scenario.
Daniel, when we talked about this, when you were here in the US, you talked about the declining economic condition in Brazil and the difficulties that even ordinary middle-class working people were feeling. Were things getting really worse under Bolsonaro, or was it the pandemic, which was having that impact?
There's a difference depending on which. Depending on if you are a member of the working class or if you are a member of the industry community, the rates of the returns of bonds, for example, they were skyrocketing during the Bolsonaro administration because of many neoliberal measures that were taken by the government. But if you were a working class person, the things were really dire, and that's the point. You have different perceptions about what Bolsonaro really was. If you ask upper middle class person or maybe a member of the community of industry owners, etc., they would have a different opinion about Bolsonaro. But the working class, they were really it was a bad time for them. That's why Lula was selected for a little margin. I would add here. Lula won by 1 million and close to 2 million votes. Almost half of the voters voted for Bolsonaro, in spite of the fact that his handling of the pandemic was outrageous. Yes, to think about lower income people that voted for Bolsonaro, you have to consider, for example, their religious affiliations. For example, Bolsonaro had a sort of 70% of votes among the new Pentecostal evangelions. There was a massive campaign of propaganda against Lula, using all these images and all these archetypes from the far right in the world. The communism will return. Lula is a Satanist, or absurd things like that. And these things really caught in people with a strong religious affiliation. So you had a mix of strategies in Brazil, orchestrated by the Bolsonaro and his allies.
Listen, Bolsonaro was seen as one of these group of right-wing populist leaders. The Trump, everybody was the Trump of their country, right? Boris Johnson was the Trump of, you have had the honor of living under two of these guys. Boris Johnson in UK, Bolsonaro here, Orbán in Hungary, Narendra Modi in India. So people have talked about these as right-wing populist leaders where the masses are really, they look up to this. Even Trump, people think was sent by God to help and save America. So the polarization in Brazil clearly is visible from the election outcome, right? Do you think that Lula will be able to diffuse this polarization, or is he actually going to continue with it? And as long as your group is bigger in number than the other side, the polarization might help him continue to remain in power, whether the governance succeeds or not. So how do you see this?
Professor Han, I think Lula, and I might sound optimistic now, but I think Lula will, indeed, he will be able to untie some of these knots because he's done this before. Brazil is not exactly a left-wing country over time. In the history of the country, left-wing parties, they have just had power in their hands for a few times. And it coincides with the time Lula was in power, basically. So, and when he was given this task of diffusing polarization and trying to unite the country again, he was able to do it, to carry out this mission. It's not easy. he will have to deal with a very, very right-wing, very conservative-leaning Congress. But he's done this before. So I am optimistic about his credentials and his diplomatic skills. He's a very diplomatic man. He's been so before. And trust me, Brazil will have a voice again at international level.
What about the economy? The economy of Brazil hasn't done well, not just during the Bolsonaro periods, but even before Bolsonaro came into power. You could see, say, maybe from 2012, 2015 onwards, you could see the decline in Brazil's economic fortunes, and you see the international stature often correlates with regards to how your economy is doing. So people simply stop talking about Brazil. So if you look at all the important issues, whether it's the war on Ukraine, whether it was a pandemic, whether it is talking about the global South, even during this food crisis with Ukraine for the global South, Brazil was not in the leadership position in any of these issues. Do you think that that is something endemic to the trends in Brazilian society, or is it just the leadership?
So, well, I'm not an expert in economics, so I'll let Daniel approach the issue afterwards. But my take, Brazil has a big chance now, a great opportunity to explore the environmental issues and maybe to connect environmental issues with this transition to green economies, which is taking place around the world. I think this is the one and only way Brazil should explore, because we have the credentials for this. And Brazil has got a lot of biodiversity. Brazil can really rely on clean sources of energy. Brazil is the barn of the world. There's a lot of food being produced in Brazil, hydric resources, not to mention forestry and indigenous populations and traditional knowledge. So we have got good credentials to have a voice when it comes to the global environmental governance. I think this is the way Lula should explore in order to bring Brazil back to the high table. This is how I feel about Brazil for the future.
What about you, Dan? Especially with the fact that Bolsonaro was also, basically trying to cut down the entire Amazon forests. So do you think there'll be much progress on the economic front?
Yes, there's a misunderstanding about what happened in Brazil in 2015 and 2014. The Workers' Party has a kind of more state-led vision about the economy. And in a sense, what happened in 2006 and 2010 was a product of this. This bigger presence of the state in Brazilian economy is understood by the Workers' Party as something needed, because they understand that we are not in the same level of competition and world power as other economies. So we need to have a proper vision about what we have to do to put Brazil in the international economic scene. And the state is fundamental for the Workers' Party. And most of, I don't know if most of it, but a lot of people from in the political universe, they think the same. But in 2014, in 2015, we had two major problems. One is that a faction in the Workers' Party, they try to make this state-led vision more present than it was in the first and the second Lula's government, and we are talking here about Dilma Rousseff government. And when they made this Dilma she made some tough decisions, for example, trying to control the prices of the electrical energy, for example. it produced big problems in the electrical companies, and they try to, how can I say this? They try to transform this state-led vision in a more, how can I say, more populist vision. You know?
Let me try and pinpoint the problem. The problem was not the fact that the economy was influenced by state policies. Economies are influenced by state policies everywhere, even in liberal societies. But the fact that this party at that time chose to overstate the influence of the state in the economy, that's the point you're trying to make, isn't it? That they overstated the role more than what it was?
There's a lot of controversy about this opinion, but yes, that's my view. You know,
Dawisson,
yes, yeah. Please.
I want to turn to a little bit towards in the international relations. So, for example, when Lula was president, there were very good relations between Brazil and India, for example, and even in European countries, he was quite popular. And the relations, at least when Obama was president, were much better between US and Brazil at that time. However, with Bolsonaro, I mean, obviously he clicked with Donald Trump, but how did Brazil fare in the international arena in terms of its bilateral relations with important countries like China, in US and India during the Bolsonaro era, and how do you see these relations evolving going forward?
Brazil has been losing ground. This is unequivocal. I mean, you just need to see, for instance, the number of trips that Bolsonaro took abroad and the number of countries he's visited, and you will easily identify one pattern. I mean, he keeps visiting some of the countries with which he's more aligned in terms of customs, in terms of worldviews. For instance, the Gulf countries. I mean, there has never been a president of Brazil who's visited so many times the Persian Gulf countries. And why so? We're not speaking of Christian countries after all. It's because they place a lot of emphasis on religion and customs and habits. Mm-hmm. And this is Bolsonaro's approach to international relations. He just wants Brazil to have connections with like-minded countries and religion-wise, basically. And this has happened for almost 4 years now, which in a way has narrowed down Brazil's margin to maneuver in IR. So when you look at Brazil's relations with European countries, you'll see that they have deteriorated a lot, even with the US. Since Joe Biden has come to the White House in January 2021, bilateral relations are clearly worse, and they are worsening as days pass by. So it is not a surprise that less than 40 minutes after Brazil's higher electoral court had declared Lula to be the winner of Brazil's presidential election, Joe Biden, he was already saluting, he was already greeting Lula for his victory. It feels that there is a will on the part of the United States to continue. I mean, it's the one and only way. Brazil and the US are the biggest countries in the hemisphere, and they should resume conversations, talks at a higher level. So my feeling is that now things have become like frozen between the two countries, but they will resume by January 2023.
Daniel, there is a pink elephant in the room that we have been ignoring, which is the role of religion itself. So was Bolsonaro's success a reflection of the growing influence of religion in Brazilian politics and culture, or was he the cause of making religion potent in the political arena? And really, what were the most important cultural or religious issues that might make people vote for Bolsonaro in spite of his bad governance?
I think yes, religion has a growing influence in Brazilian politics, but I think it's a little bit overestimated because there's part of the Brazilian population that's really touched by this idea that we have to mix religion and politics in a way that you can even defy the idea of a secular state. But it's not a position that can be attributed to the majority of the population. There's a niche of voters that are really inclined to think politics in this way. In fact, religion is growing as a major factor, but it's not the major factor in Brazilian politics now.
Even in the US now, we see cultural issues such as abortion, gay marriage, the LGBTQ issues playing a major role in right-wing politics and their ability to bridge the gap trying to get the number of votes. So they're putting coalitions which are low tax, coalition, more open economies, less environmental regulations, and then more cultural values, right? So my final round of questions. So Brazil is an important country in the world. There's no doubt about it. And it is very important for the global South. It has to lead. For a long time, in the beginning of this century, we thought that Brazil should have a permanent position in the Security Council. Now nobody talks about that. So going forward, like Lula has 4 years, I don't think he will be a president again for 2 more terms. So going forward, Dawisson, what is your vision of the role that Lula is going to play in reviving Brazil?
Yeah, but first, you're right. He's already announced he's not running for a 4th mandate, 4th term. And if he keeps his promise, it's his last dance as the president of the country. And he will try to do his best to, in a way, revive Brazil, global Brazil. Back in the early 21st century, Brazil had global aspirations. Brazil had just created a set of regional organizations like UNASUR, South American Union of States, in a way resembling the European experience. Brazil was trying to reinvigorate Mercosur, the Southern Cone, common market. And when it comes to the global South, there was the BRICS group in IPSA and some other experiments. I believe Brazil should do it again under Lula. This is what we are expecting. He should push some new initiatives from the global South, but not in a challenging way, which means it is some soft revisionism, what we expect. Brazil is not going to confront the US or Europe in any way, Brazil maybe should again play international relations by its traditional playbook, which means being universalistic, being friends with everybody, abiding by the rules of the liberal order. This is what I expect from Brazil under Lula. It's been so in the early 21st century, soft revisionism to make, a long story short.
What about Brazil's relations with China? Will we see more closer relations now, Dawisson?
It's inevitable. It's inevitable. Brazil really depends on China these days. Around 40% of Brazil's foreign trade is with China. The US accounts for only 12 or 13% these days, and Dan can prove me wrong, but it's a huge gap between the two players, China and the US. And there's a large part of Brazilian society and Brazilian businesses, agribusinesses, which really depend on Chinese imports and will struggle to make China an important Brazilian ally for the coming years. And I know there's little margin these days to play like a neutral foreign policy with regards to this bilateral confrontation between the US and China. But Brazil will have to find a place on the fence because Brazil is not confronting China either. This is how I see.
Dan, what is on the domestic economic front? Does Lula's agenda promise a revival of Brazilian economy? And the enthusiasm, the international confidence and posture will depend on how Brazil does economically at home. So do you have an optimistic view of what's going to happen?
Yeah, in part, yes. The fact is, anything better than Bolsonaro is really good enough. But there's a plan, and I'm confident about this plan because there's a major problem in Brazil after the pandemics and after the beginning of the Bolsonaro's government. That's the fact that the power of the economy as well, entirely is very depressed. The wages are very low, and the families are many families starving now in Brazil because the main thing that Lula can do, and he will do this, is trying to raise the wages and trying to rescue people from extreme poverty. And that's the first step to rise again. They are completely right about this because we are again in what is called the map of hunger. There's hunger again in Brazil. People that were lifted to a lower middle class position are now in poverty again, and the economic activity is very stuck, is very depressed because families cannot buy anything. And I think that the first thing that the Workers' Party can do is trying to raise this economic situation for the poor again. After that, I think things will get better. I'm not sure if Lula in the Workers' Party can make again the magic of attracting the attention of the financial markets and the risk evaluation agencies, and put Brazil again as a destination of foreign capital. Of course, this can happen in the second year or the third year if everything goes well, but the major challenge now is to rescue people from poverty. Without this, we can go further. That's my take.
I think that if Lula is able to set the boat right, and given the fact that he's not running again, the foreign investors will really want to know what comes after Lula. If I was going to invest money in Brazil, I would really want to know if Bolsonaro is going to come back in 4 years' time or not. And I think that will be critical. And I hope that Lula starts making it very clear as to who the successor is going to be in 4 years' time. But Brazil is a very important country, and I think that in this age when there is a significant, the U.S. government now calls that this is an inflection point in our history, which means there's a possibility that the structure of global politics will change and the liberal order is under stress, and it's quite possible that the liberal order may collapse and something new will emerge. So it is very important that nations like Brazil play an important role in shaping the destiny of the order and our planet. So thank you very much to both of you for enlightening us about what's happening in Brazil. It's good news for all of us that we have one less populist, majoritarian, undemocratic leader in the world, especially in such an important country. And I look forward to once again coming back. And maybe we'll talk about this in a year's time and see how Mr. Lula is doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for inviting us.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much.